We're interested to know, what are your hot takes right now?
The battle for EV dominance is actually going to be won or lost in the used marketplace and in the after-sales space. You wouldn't scrap a vehicle because its windscreen cracked, but that's what we're doing with batteries. We're scrapping them because actually we haven't thought through the repair.
I think for me, after-sales used cars need to be considered at the beginning of the journey. If we don't prepare today, build our store up of battery capabilities on today's batteries to go into vehicles when they become 8 years, we'll be behind the curve and won't be able to solve for it.
When we're talking about after-sales network, so much goes on underneath the surface.
The consumer expects that vehicle to perform up to a certain level, and ultimately the consumer just wants to be back in that car and back on the road.
We obviously haven't had full EVs around that long, but are we going to, in 10 years' time, be seeing those 10-year-old, 12, 15-year-old vehicles on the road like we do ICE vehicles today?
I really, really hope so. It depends on the decisions that are made today and tomorrow by the OEMs. There's the option that we move to a world where cars become single-use, disposable assets. At the moment, the majority of batteries are being thrown in the bin and they're being replaced with new. It's not a sustainable strategy. It's not what EV was about.
Welcome back to another episode of Talk Auto. I'm Holly.
And I'm Rich.
And today we are joined by Ben Hurford, Aftersales Director at AION, and Antonia Stephenson, Director of Operations and EV Battery Solutions.
And on today's episode, we're here to talk about building effective, efficient after-sales networks for electric vehicles. We're going to dive straight into it. And a question for you, Ben, really, which is, AION's one of the newest OEMs to enter the market. May this year, I think you came in. When launching, what's most important to you when thinking about establishing an after-sales network?
Yes, I guess one of the primary pieces, certainly from an AION perspective, after-sales can often be an afterthought. I know it sounds, by nature, it comes after the sale, and it does, but at AION, we've very much thought about after-sales being very much part of the forethinking.
Yeah.
I joined the business at the same time as the other sort of management team, so we've had sort of 8 months in the planning. And I guess as a new brand, you're asking the customer to take a big leap of faith, aren't you, in buying into a new brand? So it's really, really important to have that infrastructure around the vehicle. So if something that is planned needs doing, you're there to support them. If something unplanned, you're there to support them. And it comes back to that kind of saying in the automotive business, sell the first car, and then after sales, sell every car thereafter. And that's really, really important from a new brand perspective because they are taking a leap of faith. They're buying into something new. So it's really important that we're here to support that. And it's very simple in its basic form. An after-sales network, you need to have a network partner, and we've partnered with some very credible experts in that marketplace. But sticking a sign above the door is not the answer, because you need to make sure that those partners have the knowledge, the experience, and the capabilities. Because in after-sales, there's kind of three key pillars, really. You need to have the technical capabilities, and that's really about the people and the diagnostics. You need to have the parts in the right place at the right time, and then you need to have the right network partners. And then you also need that kind of wider, severer support partners.
And has some of that come consciously through learning from other brands, new brands that have come into the market and maybe haven't provided a strong after-sales service to the consumer?
Yeah, you hear lots of kind of conversations within the industry, and obviously coming from the industry myself for almost 25 years, you know what works from established brands, and you also know what doesn't work. So you have that kind of foundations to say, okay, what have I done in the past that's been really successful? What have I done in the past that maybe if I had my time again I could do better? And maybe if you say I've had that blank bit of paper, what would I do in the ideal world? So you've got that kind of blend of experience plus the opportunity to try something new. And I think as a new brand in the market, when you're that unknown entity, what's really, really super important is you kind of partner with experts. As a business, we've partnered with DHL from a parts logistics perspective, with the AA from a roadside assistance perspective, and now we're partnering with Antonia and the team to really build out our EV battery capabilities. And as a new brand, it's been really simple to actually leave that to the end, because actually you could say at the very beginning, how many batteries are going to fail, how many batteries need replacing. But for us, that was kind of one of our primary objectives, was because we're not building for the now, we're building for the next 50 to 100 years of trying to establish a brand to be successful in the market.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really obviously important to recognise, I guess, the challenge that these newer OEMs are facing in comparison to the established. You've talked a little bit, but would you want to just dive in a bit deeper about how the challenge differs And I know you've said you're using more established partners, credibility, but how does that challenge differ from previous roles that you've had where you've established those networks within different businesses?
Yeah, maybe before I directly answer that question, I think the key way to look at it from a consumer perspective, they don't understand all the different kind of silos and different functions in an after-sales business. They just have one requirement. If my vehicle needs work doing, they expect the work to be done. So what you have to make is that kind of seamless journey for the customer. So behind the scenes, it's like the swan analogy, you can be pedaling really hard beneath the surface, but they just look very graceful on the top.
Yeah.
So that's what you want the consumer to kind of experience. And I guess the primary difference between a new brand and an established brand, you have no sort of support ecosystem. If I was to join any other OEM that's been in existence for many, many years, it might not be perfect, but they have an end-to-end solution for every kind of deliverable. As a new brand, you have to then, almost on that blank piece of paper, to say, and this is really, really challenging, you have to say, okay, what could happen in the life of that vehicle? And the life is not like the first 6 months, it's like the kind of 10 plus years of that life cycle. And you have to go, okay, what do I solve for and what do I need to solve for today? But what do I need to make sure I don't solve for today that causes me a problem in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And that's really, really difficult, just trying to take all those different constituent parts.
And I guess it's very different then from some of those more established OEMs, because actually, in terms of how long you've been in the UK market or AION and other newer brands, you're not maybe sure about what that future is going to look like or what that car might. Obviously, you'll have done testing about what it might develop, but it's a bit different when it's on the road, isn't it?
100%, and we're lucky with the AION brand. The parent company is a company called GAC, an established Chinese OEM, and last year they actually built 2 million vehicles and sold 2 million vehicles. They're not a new market entrant. So we had proven vehicle data from other markets, but we didn't have data from the UK and how the vehicle performed with UK drivers on UK roads. So you had to kind of make a lot of assumptions, and as heading up a new team, one of the key focuses was bringing in people with expertise. So obviously I had that unique opportunity to not only build a strategy, but also build a team. So I was able to go out to the market and say, okay, what do I need? And then you find the people with the right capabilities. But I've not just gone for experts in one subject. I've tried to take experts that also have a broad understanding.
Yeah.
Because you've got so many constituent parts to knit together, you need someone to say, okay, if I'm designing something in parts, I'm doing something in technical, actually they understand the kind of how they link. So what you want to avoid is someone going, this is the best thing for me, but actually it's a negative for someone else. So it's trying to, like I said before, the consumer doesn't see warranty, doesn't see technical, it doesn't see parts, it just sees, I need something doing, I want the vehicle back when I expect it. So we have to join all those dots together.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we've obviously got Antonia with us today, who leads EV battery solutions. Is that then where the business that you run and look after would partner with new and established OEMs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're there to support at whatever stage of the life cycle, and it's a very different challenge for new entrant OEMs compared to the established. They've got a completely different infrastructure, very different setup. And the new entrants, they don't know what that sale is going to look like. There's almost a confidence of volume to some extent when you've already got an established brand. Whereas for a new entrant, you haven't got anything. And so that's where, and I think it's true throughout the EV industry, that's where partnerships come in so that you can get scale and expertise without necessarily having to have the enormous investment before your business builds. So yeah, we work really closely with the OEMs to help them design what that after sales looks like from a battery perspective, because it's the most expensive component of the EV, it's the most technical component, and it presents a whole number of new challenges that have never been seen by any of the OEMs, and every market is different. So entering the UK is a completely different experience to entering into the other markets, and the different rules and regulations and how you set up. And so that's where expertise really comes into play in the market.
I think maybe just to jump back in, I think the question you asked, Holly, what's different from a new entrant? One of the biggest challenges is actually predicting what parts will be required and when. And that's something we've been able to sort of tap into Antonia and team's expertise, because like Antonia said, the battery is by nature the most expensive component of an electric vehicle and is by nature very complex. And actually, if you don't just take it from a sort of pounds and pence perspective, you take it from like a kind of sustainable kind of ecosystem of longevity, it's not the right strategic direction just to keep replacing new batteries, we have a battery issue, we replace it. So we've worked very hard, and coming back to some of the cultural differences in other markets, certainly the Chinese market is very much a I buy a new one, I replace that new one in a few years and get another new one. Whereas in the UK, where the used car market is so important from a kind of an economic perspective, and also just the fact that cars stay in the market for longer, we're not only like kind of solving for today, where maybe in the first 2-3 years of that vehicle life cycle, maybe it's appropriate to replace the battery, maybe it isn't, we have to make that right decision. Fast forward into 5 or 6 years time, it certainly isn't appropriate when the the vehicle value might only be £10,000. It isn't appropriate to maybe replace a component that's half of that cost. So it's very much important today that you go, okay, what knowledge do we need? So it's not only just saying, okay, what knowledge do I need to repair the vehicle, it's then how do you take those subcomponents? So we've been working very hard to say, okay, what do we need to do in the UK? How do we then maybe work with our parent back in China to make sure we've got those components, so we're kind of preparing for the long term? Whereas in my position, that would be very easy to leave for tomorrow. But I know if I don't do it today and we don't have a strategy for it, the day that we need it would be the day that we're not prepared.
Yeah.
So it's all about that preparation.
Yeah, I was going to ask, actually, you've obviously worked for what we would call an established OEM, and have now moved across to work for a new entrant, where you're setting up purely EV rather than a combination of ICE vehicles and EV. Is there a difference in terms of how you have to plan from an after-sales perspective when you're thinking about bodywork repairs, parts planning, all of those things? Is that different being purely EV?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of it that you'd say I guess most people in my position, if you had the opportunity to build something for the first time, whether you're in a legacy brand trying to have that unique opportunity to say, okay, I'm a legacy brand, but I can do it fresh for the first time, or coming into the market, you have to kind of think about that kind of that ecosystem of what's required. Like I've said it a couple of times now, consumers don't see individual items, they just see the end-to-end solution. But with an electric vehicle, you have to very much think about the components themselves, because by nature of electric vehicle, they're very complex. There's a lot of architecture that's high voltage systems. That's quite expensive. So you need to make sure you've got the right capabilities. And today, a lot of our network partners are very much geared up. They've got very good technical experts, but they're very much prepared for kind of keeping the electric vehicle maintained, but not necessarily getting into the high voltage systems, because they don't see enough of it. They don't have that repeatability. And we were sort of touching on before this meeting, there's not one battery, it's not uniform across every brand. So there's lots of capable battery manufacturers. They all have their own design capabilities. And we were talking to someone just before this session. They're actually driving a 4-year-old electric vehicle. We were talking through some of the characteristics in that vehicle. And actually, the new vehicles, we don't have that because it's been designed in a different way. So it's not only have you got different battery manufacturers, you've got different technology that's moving super quickly. So again, you're not just solving for today, because the battery that's produced today for the new vehicle won't be produced by that supplier in 3 or 4 years' time. So you need to make sure you've got that preparation for tomorrow, but that comes from today, because if you just keep disposing of the batteries today, you don't have any stock for tomorrow. Yeah. So it's that really complex sort of jigsaw as a manufacturer.
Yeah, and it's a huge challenge. It's a very different workshop environment to where you can repair an ICE vehicle to what an EV needs. You've got to think through all the different things, so all the complexities of the parts, but then you've got all the health and safety to consider. So, these are high voltage batteries. They're live when you're working on them. You've got to consider the safety, the isolation, the fire risk, the things we don't really like talking about, but they are real, and you have to be prepared to manage those. Safe battery handling, the equipment you need to be able to pick up a 500 kilogram battery is not necessarily something that's already in place within a dealership. So you've got to think through all of the safety. And then, as Ben was talking to, you've got technicians who you have to train in a very specialised skill that's very different to where they've been. The diagnostics is electronic, and it's a very fast-paced, moving marketplace. So being trained to work on the battery that is in the car on the road today doesn't mean that you can work on the battery that's in the car on tomorrow. And maintaining that when there's a skill shortage, and also when actually battery failures aren't that common. Battery failure is less than 2% generally. You're not seeing batteries in workshops on a day in, day out basis. Keeping people trained and engaged and up to speed with all the latest legislation is really hard work, and it's a huge investment. And that's where you've got to really think through, how are you going to handle this and what do you need? And whilst you may have your networks in place to handle those small volumes, if there is an issue that requires a recall, for instance, and don't wish that on anyone, but if there is, then you've got to think about how will your network handle that and what will it look like? Because as an OEM, you have obligations to meet in terms of the warranties, but also the ongoing life of those batteries. And the legislation is continuing to evolve. It changes all the time. And it's making it more and more complicated and putting more and more on the OEMs to manage that. So it's a very different process, repairing an EV to repairing an ICE vehicle. And you can't simply pivot from one to the other without investing heavily in tooling, etc.
Yeah, I feel like quite a lot of what we've discussed is, the difference between today and the future, and that today and 5 years ago, today and 10 years ago. It's such a rapidly evolving industry, and that applies for OEMs, but it also applies for all the partners, all the networks, consumers as well. Mm-hmm. And that's something I wanted to touch on, because I think when we're talking about after-sales networks, as you mentioned, Ben, so much goes on underneath the surface, but it looks like a lovely swan floating across. So beyond the car itself, how does kind of service and support and kind of the support customers receive make them feel confident about the purchase from a new OEM or just of an EV as well?
I think as a new OEM, whether you're bringing an ICE vehicle to market, electric vehicle to market, the consumer expects that vehicle to perform up to a certain level. Everyone understands products have routine requirements and they expect you to be able to service them efficiently. And people understand that things go wrong unexpectedly. So I think what their expectation is that when they need an intervention, you have the right knowledge. You can speak to them empathetically, you deal with them efficiently, and ultimately the consumer just wants to be back in that car and back on the road. So you have to build that kind of solution and make sure that, whether that be a body repair, because take body repair as an example, there's lots of proven, experienced body shops in the UK. We've got a new product that on the surface is broadly the same as a lot of other products, but there are some different characteristics. So it's about making sure that those characteristics are known to your network. And what's super important as a new manufacturer in the market, especially when you're a very small manufacturer, you can't be different, because you'll have to place yourself in a big ecosystem that happens every day, day in, day out. And if you're this kind of outlier that does it a different way, it becomes very problematic. And I think one of the biggest costs of driving a vehicle outside of purchasing the vehicle is actually the insurance.
Yeah.
So we work very closely with the insurance sector in the UK, which sometimes new OEMs, again, not through a lack of willingness, but the challenge was a new OEM, you have so many things to do. The risk is you kind of say, actually, I probably don't need to do that today, but actually, if you don't have a good relationship with insurance providers and they're confident in your product, that actually has a detrimental impact on the cost of insurance. And if you're a consumer looking at a new car and you can say, okay, this costs X pounds per month, there's an established brand that costs Y pounds a month, and actually they're broadly the same, but actually you can insure that one for half the price, you probably aren't going to try the new brand. Yeah. So I think that sometimes as a new brand, you have to think more than just actually the capability, is actually then giving those other parts of the sector the confidence. And that confidence comes out of working with other partners and,
Yeah, I think to some extent, having good after sales is just a requirement. It's bad after sales that's going to cause you the problems. Brand loyalty in EVs is lower than it's in ICE vehicles. And so, people are more open to trying different brands. We've got more OEMs placing cars on the market than we've ever had. And we know that people are using social media and AI in making decisions about what they want to do. So having good after sales and there not being any noise in the public forums about your after sales solution isn't necessarily going to win you anything. Yeah. But having bad after sales and people having bad experiences and their vehicles off the road, that's where you're really going to struggle. Yeah. And so having the infrastructure in place from day one is almost a hygiene factor to surviving in the industry, whether you're an existing brand or a new entrant, because actually that loyalty is not there and social media is becoming more important and the court of public opinion is taking control.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned, Ben, there, confidence amongst your suppliers, but then that trickles down into confidence amongst consumers, doesn't it? And that's what's so important when it comes to new market entrants. Now, Antonia, EV Battery Solutions has been in operation for 18 months in the UK and over a decade in mainland Europe. Yep. What's been one of your greatest learnings from that time?
I think this may sound obvious, but there isn't one single EV battery repair solution. I think it would have been very easy to assume that would be the case, that the industry would evolve in a way that meant that batteries were designed the same, manufactured the same, and that all batteries in all cars would ultimately converge on one thing, and therefore the solution would be really evident and obvious, and that it would be a very simple market to serve. But that's absolutely the complete opposite of how the industry has evolved, and it evolves at such a rapid pace that we have to evolve with it. And our customers aren't one audience. We have so many different customers and they all have competing priorities. So an OEM is focused on in warranty, residual values at scale and their brand. But the challenges for a new OEM are very different to an existing OEM. And so they have different priorities. A battery OEM is more focused on the diagnostics and the product and continual improvement of the battery. Commercial fleets focus on vehicle downtime. If the vehicle's not on the road, it's not making any money. So that's their priority. Passenger car fleets and dealers, they want residual value focus and speed of service. So we have all these competing priorities. So we've had to design our business to be flexible to the strategy of the individual customer and to meet the needs of that individual customer. So we flex our operating model, our diagnostic approach, our commercial model to align with that strategy, whether you've got one car on the road or thousands of cars on the road. The great thing is that every customer we work with, they have the same core priorities: safety, quality, performance, and communication. They're absolutely fundamental. Safety is the number one priority for us as in the EV industry. And we hold those at the core of everything we do. We won't compromise on them. And it's great that absolutely nobody in the industry has ever asked us to compromise on those four things. And that's how you build trust as a supplier to the marketplace and how you build trust in the after-sales market.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was the fact that, and it's good news, is that actually the number of battery failures is relatively small. I think you said 2% is the number. And we know through learnings actually over the last 5 years that battery degradation is significantly less than what was anticipated. But how important is it to ensure that within the after sales and that EV battery and that component is actually managed and there is a solution should a failure happen? Because I think when I think about some of the groups I work with personally, or the fleet and lease cos, when they are multi-brand as well and they're dealing with multiple new entrant OEMs, established brands, as you said, there is different battery tech and function. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So obviously it needs the ability to go and use an EV battery solutions there. How important is it to ensure that is in place?
Maybe I'll we were just talking a little bit earlier, I think before we talk about the repairs itself, and I think an element that often gets overlooked is actually, I think talking about battery performance over time is actually the performance of a battery on a shelf, or maintaining that performance is as critical as actually the repair. And that's something that we talked about because through our partnership with DHL, they actually made the introduction to Antonia and team, because as an OEM, it'd be quite easy to bring batteries in, stick them on a shelf, but actually only have a limited life cycle. If you don't do anything with them, fast forward 9 to 12 months, actually the performance of that battery for the life of its usage will be lower than it would be if it's maintained. So, and the thing as a new entrant, that's where it's been super beneficial to work with someone like Antonia and speak to us, because actually we don't have the scale today. We've got a very small vehicle park, and when you take a percentage that's very small of a very small number, you end up with a very small number. You don't need to be a mathematician to work that one out. But as us, we wouldn't have the capabilities. If we had to go and create that all from new, it just wouldn't be viable. The return on that investment, our investors would look at us, actually, it doesn't make sense. So actually, well, I guess what companies like yourself are offering is that kind of scalability. So we are very small today. Hopefully in the future, we're a lot larger. And by function of being larger, we have a bigger need. So it's that kind of adaptability, whether we're delivering 2 battery needs to you or 10,000, the solution works, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's the flexibility. If you've got an established network and your battery failure rates are really low and the network can handle it, that's fantastic. We look to work with our customers in a complementary way to that dealer network and the way they operate, so that you've got that flexibility and that scale, because if there is an event that requires a lot of volume to be handled, we're there to be able to do that. But also, as we've said, the industry is moving at a rapid pace. The batteries made a year ago may no longer be in production. You have to prepare for what's coming down the line, and having that solution in place from day one means that you have a longevity for that battery. The total cost of ownership of a battery is a fundamental part of the used buying decision. And total cost of ownership needs to reflect the value of the vehicle at the point in time it's purchased. We know that the value of cars depreciates over time. Putting a brand new battery into a 6-year-old car may not make financial sense. You've got to think about how are you going to solve for those problems in the future right now? Because as Ben said, if you wait until you have those problems in the future, you aren't going to be able to develop a solution. So you've got to really think about the whole life cycle of the EV, the whole life cycle of the battery from day one, and work out where you want your brand to be and how you want your brand to survive and thrive in the market.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you very much. We're just going to take a short break.
I'm excited about this. So in this month's episode, guys, we are running a new segment. It's Hot Takes. We're interested to know, Ben, Antonia, what are your hot takes right now?
I think for me, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but it's certainly an opinion that I hold and that I, hold firm, is that the battle for EV dominance is actually going to be won or lost in the used marketplace and in the after-sales space. To date, the focus has been on new car sales. It's been on hitting the legislative requirements, getting cars out, addressing consumer concerns around range, charging speed of the vehicle, and that's led to manufacturing taking over in terms of decision making, sustainability maybe not at the forefront of the decisions that have been made. And we've had lots of new entrants, as we've talked about, lots of new entrants in the market. And not all of those entrants and not all of the existing brands will survive in the form that they exist today. And it's my view that the ones who do survive and thrive will be the ones that in 5-10 years' time can keep their cars and their batteries on the road at an affordable price. So I think the battleground is shifting. The used market is really going to start taking priority, and the focus needs to be on that.
Yeah.
Ben, you were nodding there. Does that mean you agree?
Yeah, no, I do agree. I guess it'd be controversial if I said I didn't agree, but I guess by nature of us actually, I guess AION taking the decision to actually approach the team at Cox Battery Solutions is by nature we're probably thinking the same way. And I think my kind of hot take, and it's kind of very much closely linked to what Antonia's saying, it's not about, I think the success of after sales long term, it's not just about replacing components, it's actually about repairing components. And most people go, well, that's very obvious, and yes, it is, but actually to deliver that is quite different. And it comes back to one of the questions from earlier. Electric vehicle by its nature is very different. A lot of our partner networks who've delivered excellent service to their customers for many, many years and will continue to do so are very much geared up to delivering and managing ICE vehicles. And obviously, as the market grows on electric vehicles today, it's in the high 20s, and over the next years it will increase even further. But you're still going to have that legacy park of ICE engines. So our networks are going to have to blend that kind of balance between electric and ICE. Whereas people like Antonia and the team and ourselves, because we're an electrified brand, can be experts in electric. So we have that kind of unique opportunity to focus all our attentions and efforts onto one type of fuel train. We're not trying to balance 2 different types of fuel trains, many different complexities. So that's probably, it sounds very bullish, but that's sometimes where a new brand can actually take a step ahead of some of the established players, because we can be very focused and very niche and focused on what we're trying to deliver.
Yeah. So one of the things, because I was thinking about this yesterday and we were talking, Holly, about it, which is at the moment it's not uncommon to see 10, 15, even 20-year-old ICE vehicles on the road. We obviously haven't had full EVs around that long. Okay, some of the original OEMs that came to market full EV are just about getting to that point, maybe a decade in. But are we going to, in 10 years' time, be seeing those 10-year-old, 12, 15-year-old vehicles, EV vehicles, on the road like we do ICE vehicles today?
I really, really hope so. Unless we want to move, it depends on the decisions that are made today and tomorrow by the OEMs and the decisions that they make about where the priorities sit and where they want their brands to be. There's the option that we move to a world where cars become single-use, disposable assets, I guess. It happens in other marketplaces. We, as the focus on new car sales and particularly the focus on extending range, battery design has really changed. And that's actually reduced the repairability of batteries. So it's starting to shift and it's starting to come back. But if we don't start thinking now about how we will serve the market in 5, 10, 15 years' time, then there'll be no option. Because at the moment, the majority of batteries are being thrown in the bin if they get the smallest issue with them, and they're being replaced with new. It's not a sustainable strategy. It's not what EV was about. I mean, it's kind of akin to scrapping your car because it needs a new tyre to some extent, you know, throwing a battery in the bin because it needs a new wire. It's sometimes what's happening. And so I think the answer to the question is absolutely, that's exactly what we should all be aiming for and what we should see. But it does need some proactive life cycle management, supply chain management, and some legislation around the middle of the ecosystem. Legislation's all been about new cars, recycling. We need legislation to start really pushing for the circular economy, the repairability. We're starting to see it in Europe. UK is likely to follow suit. That's forcing disclosures around battery health, expected service life, those kinds of things. So, yeah, I really do hope so.
Sorry, Holly. So in your... I cut you off.
I was going to ask you if that question was your hot take, that EVs won't survive 12 years.
No, I don't have an opinion on that. But what I was going to say is obviously, so what you're leaning towards, I say a buzzword, it's not, the whole focus around a lot of things, not just in automotive, is recycling. But actually, the view there from you is very much, it's almost as important to consider repairing and reusing that for its intended purpose. Recycling
sounds like it's amazing, it's really environmentally friendly, and it's great. It's absolutely the right answer when something no longer has any value in it. But if you want to maximise the value from the asset, you want to maximise the carbon that's been used in producing it, you have to keep it in use for as long as possible. And the only way to do that is to actually make sure that you're extracting that use by repair, remanufacture, reusing batteries in second life applications such as static storage. Recycling is 100% the answer for when things become waste. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be the answer for everything that breaks. And I think, we just need to bear that in mind as we design batteries, design vehicles. You wouldn't throw a vehicle you wouldn't scrap a vehicle because its windscreen cracked. Would you? But that's what we're doing with batteries. We're scrapping them because actually we haven't thought through the repair.
I guess maybe just a step in there, I think, again, legislation is definitely important. I think that will definitely focus the mind. But I think as an OEM, and I know this is not getting into sort of deep profitability, but the business economics mean you need a used car market, because as a new car OEM, you make your profit primarily through the sale of new car, and then through life through the sale of parts. But your partner network make as much money through the sale of used cars as they do for the sale of new cars. So actually, if you want to have a sustainable franchise model, you need to have a used car ecosystem to feed that model. And if you take a broader view and you think about the economy, there's how many independent workshops are there today that employ a number of people. They live on the back of predominantly older cars. So if those older cars don't exist, not only are you damaging your own franchise network, you have an impact on the future, the wider economy. So I guess as an industry, whether that be through regulatory encouragement or through OEMs taking the longer term, broader view, we have to find a way of making electric vehicles sustainable beyond the first and second use. And whether they will last 20 years, I guess, time will tell. But I think through technology that's advanced so far from, fast forward to, one of the brand I work for, when they brought their first electric vehicle out, if you had a 100-mile range, that was seen to be kind of leading, where now 100 miles, that's probably a third of a battery charge. Yeah. So you just think how far we've come in the last 10 years. And if we were sitting here in 10 more years' time, what would a battery look like and how would it perform? I don't think any of us will know in the room. And I don't even think the battery providers know, do they? Because they're developing so quickly. And I think that's why it's such an interesting space, because not only now are you trying to sell vehicles, you're trying to think about how you maintain those vehicles in a dynamic and economically and sustainable way. So it's quite an interesting problematic to have.
Brilliant. So thank you very much for that hot takes section. I guess we've talked quite a lot about the used car market as we see it. And I want to first go into, Ben, I'm really interested because AION has a very specific Grade 8 policy, which I want to talk to you about. So when building an EV after sales kind of capability, at what point should that used market be considered?
I think for us, it was very much, again, from the outset of our business kind of proposition. And, Grade 8, I'll come back to in a second, because that kind of builds sort of long-term sustainability and sort of gives consumers confidence in the product. But yeah, to answer your question, I think for me, after sales, used cars need to be considered at the beginning of the journey. Mm-hmm. Grade 8 for us was something to be a differentiator in the market, because today the UK market is very competitive. There's a lot of new entrants. If you go back sort of 10 years, maybe there was probably sub 40 brands in the UK. I think today we're kind of north of 70. So you think so it demonstrates that the consumers are open to new brands, so less brand loyalty. So we decided as a management team to bring out the Grade 8. So for those that aren't familiar, Grade 8 is 8 years warranty, which today is probably hygiene. A lot of brands have a very long warranty. Ours is a bumper to bumper, so it stays with the vehicle and it doesn't reduce over time. We've got 8 years of servicing, so that means that the consumer has that confidence that the vehicle will be maintained to the right standard during the life of the vehicle. 8 years of roadside assistance, so if something does go wrong in the latter years, they know that they can be returned back into our network. And then 8 years of MOT test cover. The reason for doing the MOT test at the end is because that's the first defection point you normally see as a brand, because they go outside of the network, maybe to a local independent garage or one of the fast fit centres for their MOT. They experience what the outside world looks like. They realise actually it can be a very good experience, and then you start to lose them as a brand. So we were trying to give the consumer confidence in the long-term capabilities of us as a brand through the product and through our after-sales capabilities, but also selfishly want to keep the customer within our ecosystem, because then we can give her the best experience. We can make sure the vehicle's maintained to the right level. And then if something does go wrong with one of the more complex components, we know that it's in the right hands to give that vehicle the best repair possible.
And I guess that then reflects back onto the used car market to make sure that those vehicles are properly maintained throughout those first 8 years.
Yeah.
And then with them, obviously, when that goes into the used car market, those residual values you would like to think would be a lot stronger as well.
Yeah, we've actually seen, I guess it's public knowledge that if you look at our residual value in the sector, we're actually one of the leading residual values, and a lot of that was born out of the Grade 8.
Oh, okay.
Because the residual value setters actually said that's a really strong proposition. So that basically means if, let's say, the first owner takes a 4-year PCP, the second owner's then taken the vehicle at the beginning of year 5, they've actually got 4 years of warranty, 4 years of servicing, 4 years of roadside assistance, and their MOT tests covered for 4 years. That's actually stronger than some of the established OEMs where you're buying a new car. So actually, whether you're the first or second, maybe even third owner of our car, you might actually be getting a stronger in-life proposition. So that's how important we see it, not just from a monetary perspective on the residual value, so it has benefits obviously on the new car sale price, but also through that kind of customer experience. We can keep them within our ecosystem to make sure that the vehicle's maintained at the right level. But then also we can get traction with second, third owners, where a lot of OEMs struggle to do that. Yeah. So then they're always having to chase those older customers.
It's also cultivating that trust, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's we've talked a bit about confidence in new brands, trust in EVs, trust in the providers, etc. And I think with, what I found really interesting is that this is something that will cultivate that trust and transparency as well between where the vehicle's been, what it's done, to make sure that it has that life cycle kind of maintenance with trusted providers as well.
Yeah, and I think trust comes out as a new brand. Again, GAC, a lot of consumers wouldn't necessarily know about that brand. Last year they delivered 2 million vehicles mainly in domestic market China, but into other markets. They're actually one of the first vehicles to sell brands to sell a million electric vehicles. So actually GAC top 5 manufacturer in China. They've received JD Power awards for quality for the first 9 years. So these are super. I would say I'm paid to work for the company, but actually, honestly, they are really good quality vehicles, and hopefully we're demonstrating to the consumers we're really confident on the quality of the vehicle. So therefore, we're comfortable to give an 8 years warranty. We're comfortable to give 8 years worth of servicing to drive the brand. But I think it has many benefits into that used car market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to be honest, you answered the question before I'd even asked it.
Okay.
So that was great. But I guess you won't be moving through your first sales cycle at the moment because you're only new into the market in May. But is it unique with AION offering that right the way through? I know that the the extended warranty period exists on the battery specifically as it moves through ownership, but passing on things like MOT and those things to the new owner, is that something others you think should consider when coming into the market?
I guess every brand has their own strategy, and I think they have to decide what's right for them and their business. I guess it's not really appropriate probably for me to say whether they should or shouldn't. I guess each brand needs to make their own decision. Every brand has a certain amount of means to support a vehicle sale, and you can support that in different ways. You can obviously provide a discount, you can provide support into the financial package. We've taken a decision to invest some of our support into providing that in-life support on the vehicle to give the consumer the confidence. So we think it's the right thing to do because it has the RV benefit at the beginning. We'll have that consumer longevity, whether it be the first, second, third owner, they will hopefully come back into our ecosystem, so we'll get to build that relationship. So we think it's right for the AION business.
Oh, great.
I think residual value is absolutely key to the second-hand, third-hand market. Total cost of ownership is the thing that's driving that. How much is it going to cost? And having some certainty around some of those areas can only help to support that total cost of ownership calculation that people are doing. People, there was a lot of negative press around EVs when they first started, and that kind of continues to some extent. A lot of people are, I'll buy a new EV because it comes with a warranty and I can give it back when it breaks, which isn't the given. But I think in that second-hand market, having that confidence that there is an existing solution and that there is a route to repair, a route to actually keeping your vehicle on the road, to maintaining the performance that you want from it, I think that really helps in those conversations. And you need these solutions in place to build the confidence of people buying EVs in the second-hand market. Because once people start buying them, more people will start buying them, because my friend just bought one and therefore I feel comfortable making the same decision. That is how it grows. And so I think, it all helps with that ability to understand. And, 8 years as standard, we're giving these warranties on batteries. Batteries are robust pieces of equipment. There is absolute confidence in them. When they first started, perhaps they weren't quite as technically capable as they are now, but absolutely they last 8 years and beyond. But that confidence needs to grow within the market. And so I think anything that helps people get more confident in the EV purchasing journey, and in particular in that buying a used EV, I think is hugely helpful.
So with that in mind then, and you touched on it earlier about the enhancements around range and technology moving forward as it's done, what do you think needs to be done around, because there was all that stuff around range anxiety of the consumer and all of those different things, what do you think needs to be done, or we could do more on to create that consumer confidence or further enhance it?
I think maybe there's not so much consumer confidence there, because I think we've overaddressed a lot. It was range anxiety, it was then charge anxiety, and I think most OEMs have addressed those points now. Vehicles go a very long way, and also they can be charged very quickly. We're probably at that point where a lot of consumers yet haven't experienced that used car failure beyond the warranty, because there's only very few brands that have vehicles beyond 8 years today. And I think Antonia touched on it earlier, social media is a really powerful tool, positively and negatively. So it won't be long before vehicles get into their 9th, 10th year, maybe have an issue with the battery. And if we're not set up to repair that battery, at that point that vehicle's perfectly written off, because the cost of replacement would be greater than the value of the vehicle. So almost we're preparing for tomorrow's challenges. So I think it would be easy to sit here as a new brand today because we're a long way from 8 years. But actually, we know, like Antonia says, the battery technology is moving so quickly. If we don't prepare today, build our store up of battery capabilities on today's batteries to go into vehicles when they become 8 years, we'll be behind the curve and we won't be able to solve for it. So actually, I think we're trying to solve for the pain points that a lot of people haven't yet experienced. And if we don't have those solutions in 8-9 years' time, we won't be able to have those vehicles on the road for longer periods of time.
Yeah, it's too late to try and solve this problem when it arises, because we're talking about buying used vehicles. We need to be talking about buying used batteries to put in used vehicles if there's a problem, because financially, new batteries are expensive. We know this. When they go out of production, can you even get one, let alone how expensive are they going to be? Whereas actually, if there are approved to manufacture a standard, used batteries, refurbished batteries available, it means that actually the second-hand market has a solution that makes financial sense and that consumers understand that. And we know that the insurance industry, insurance premiums are a huge topic of conversation in the electric vehicle industry. They're really focused on repairability, the network that you have, and the availability of parts. And they're looking at that. And that information is becoming more and more available through social media, through lots of channels. And if you can't get insurance on a car because it doesn't have the right solutions, it's a big problem for your brand, because you're not going to sell any more of them. And if you know that the second-hand vehicle doesn't have a residual, any value, the new market becomes a real problem for you. So you have to start thinking about it now and preparing for what you're going to need in the future before it goes out of production. Because that for me is one of the biggest challenges that people are going to face, because the majority of batteries are being recycled.
I think maybe just to jump in on that insurance point is a really, really critical piece. And I was saying to Antonia earlier, as a new brand, I think I touched on it in one of the earlier sort of answers. As a new brand, you have to work with established partners to give the kind of wider network confidence. One of the two questions that often I've been asked is, what's your parts solution? Because they realise that's one of the pain points. And once you say you're working with a partner like DHL, you've worked with the manufacturer to profile the stock holdings, you're preparing for the next volume of vehicles arriving, they tend to ask you no more questions. And one of the pieces that insurance companies asked me very early on is about batteries. So do you have any standards around battery damage? So if it gets a slight cut in the battery underneath from hitting a rock, a curb, what's your strategy? And then the second piece they asked me is, what's your repair strategy? And as soon as I said we're starting to work with Cox Automotive Battery Solutions, they asked me no more questions. Even though we haven't yet got a fully mature end-to-end solution, the fact that we were thinking about it, we identified a partner and we had a plan, they had the confidence that when we needed to have that solution, it would be mature enough to deliver. So I think the message really is about preparation for the future. Sitting here today, none of this is a problem in my position, but if we don't plan today, it will be a big problem when it does arise, and we wouldn't necessarily have the capabilities to solve it.
And it absolutely is a problem that we see in some of our customers, where they have the older batteries and they're no longer, the parts or the batteries are no longer available. What is the solution? And that's an area where we work closely with them to help them develop solutions to keep vehicles on the road, because the OEMs have huge obligations around these vehicles, and there's things like right to repair. The topic of conversation keeps coming up. I want the right to have my vehicle repaired. I want access to parts in the future. It's only going to get more and more pressured. And so, those conversations are becoming really, really important. And the OEMs who are thinking about them now and addressing them are the ones who we're going to see with the 10, 15-year-old cars on the road in. Yeah.
And do you think that comes with making it easier to identify the battery health as well? I mean, obviously there are solutions out there now that plug into an OTP and providers do that, or obviously businesses like yourself can immediately identify the diagnostics of a battery health. But today I couldn't just look in my vehicle and say, oh, my battery is at 94% health, like you could with your phone as an example. Do you think that will come and aid consumer confidence as well?
I guess potentially. A lot of OEMs, we have the capability to, through our diagnostic tool, to see the battery health. Today, you're right, it's not visible to the customer. I guess if you could do the maths to say on day one, my WLTP was something, and then when you charge your vehicle to full, if you look at what the stated mileage, I guess you can make some assumptions on how that battery is performing, because over time, the maximum range will start to reduce. Potentially, I guess on your phones, you can see the battery health, can't you? And I think that comes back to some of the longevity pieces, and we were touching on with someone earlier. 4 years ago, it wasn't so common knowledge that you're better to charge a battery to 80% and then cap it there if you can, if you don't need the longer range. But then you can managing that performance over time. I think people would fast charge because maybe they didn't have home charging. Whereas now, if you can sort of manage that vehicle and slow charging, maximing out at 80% where possible, and then blending in some rapid charging, and then you're going to sort of elongate the life of that battery. So I think as consumers, if I was as an electric vehicle driver, as a consumer, effectively, I'm more knowledgeable, and I think OEMs are more knowledgeable, and there's a broader supply chain to aid that knowledge. I think we're definitely in a better space than we were a number of years ago.
I mean, it's a key part of what consumers are now asking about. It's become a bit of a buzzword when people are looking at buying cars, battery health. And the new battery passports that are coming in, it's European legislation, but most OEMs are adopting it in the UK as well for ease. Every time your battery is serviced in some way, the battery health is going to have to be recorded in that battery passport. So I think battery health is hugely important, and understanding what impacts on battery health and how to behave with your battery and what it means is really important. And we see from sales data that there is a correlation between battery health and value of vehicle. So it's clearly impacting on what people perceive the value of a vehicle to be. The biggest concern when buying an electric car or an electric van or anything is, how long's that battery going to last me, and is it a good battery? Battery health is currently the key indicator of that. It's how much capacity has that battery got left. And there is a direct correlation right now between battery health and price. So it's absolutely fundamentally important. Understanding it is really important, but it has to be standardized, because otherwise one person's battery health may be very different to someone else's, and you can't then draw a comparison. So we have to make sure that there is absolute clarity about what it means and why it's important, or where it might not be important. If you're buying a car that's 10 years old, you can't expect it to have 95% battery health, because why would it have that? Now, maybe you want to go out and buy a new battery for it that does have better health, and that's an absolute option. So actually, changing the value of a vehicle. But battery health is currently the thing that consumers are really focused on when it comes to buying a used car.
Absolutely. We've touched on so many interesting topics today, and really thank you very much both for being on. But I want to leave our audience with one final question for you both. So what is one thing that you wish more people knew about EV after sales? Ben, I'll start with you.
I think it's probably just that focus on repairability. I think it's probably we've talked about it a lot today.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people take it as maybe a thing that is tomorrow's opportunity, not today's challenge. And I think that's really it, is to prepare yourself for the future. Because when the future comes, it will be harder to react.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess mine's very similar, which would be that most batteries are repairable in some form. Design has a massive impact on how repairable that battery is. And we've moved away from the focus on repairability as we've focused on range extension. But we need to move back in that direction. But most batteries have elements of repairability. Recycling them is great when they no longer work, but actually we need to reduce the amount of recycling for things that actually are just a little bit broken.
So repair is the theme of the podcast, I think, this month. Thank you so much both for being on. I hope you've had a lovely time. And thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in for this month's episode of Talk Auto. As ever, we have an email in our show notes if you'd like to get in contact or suggest a topic for the podcast.
And follow us wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can also watch this episode on our YouTube channel at Cox Automotive Europe.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month for another episode of Talk Auto.